This is the OGM weekly call on Thursday, September 28th, 2023. We have a very fun topic that Pete Kaminsky suggested, and Pete is arriving now. There we go. Oh, Pete's Modern Future has had a big upgrade. I think he put it through Stable Diffusion or something, did he not?
Midjourney.
Midjourney, sorry, yes. But like the thing I'm still missing, Pete, I think other people might echo this, is your space car outside. Like
I'll work on that.
We
waiting.
don't need cars. We don't need cars anymore.
Well, it's not a car. It's like your space plane, your city, flight vehicle thing.
I think there should be two suns on the horizon in the window too.
Oh,
But this is a good looking joint. You got a future as an interior designer and architect and city builder, Pete.
yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Whole new career.
Yep.
Whole new career.
Whole new career. Love that. Let me look up one last thing. Which one? Got me. And Pete recommended a lovely topic, which I posted in the invite last night. And I will explain in a moment. Well, I guess I'm not going to find that link. I'll just take us in. So, Pete, I kind of riffed on your idea, and I'm interested in where everybody wants to take it. But the notion is music, and there are lots of different angles on it. Like, what's your favorite music is the obvious thing. Then that's George Jetson after he passes through the ring. Do you play an instrument? Do you want to play for us? What music affects you? What do you know about music? How can we learn more about music? Any of those kinds of things, whatever floats your boat. And I put together a couple of things. I figured I would jump in and start just for grins. I did not pick any theme music on coming in, but remember that when you screen share, if you want to screen share music, you have to check the little box that says include audio. Otherwise, we won't hear what you're screen sharing. Just a pro tip ahead of time, that if you just do a normal screen share, it doesn't normally share audio along with. So feel free to play a piece of, I don't know that we have time to listen to complete pieces, but segments of things you love would be fantastic, would be great. And my take is going to start like this, which is I have, of course, a thought in my brain called my favorite music. My favorite genre of music is very likely Nueva Trova and Tropicalismo. It's basically 1970s Latin American music that arose because there were dictatorships everywhere. And one of my theories out of that and out of other evidence is that pressure creates great art. That if you look at the US in the 70s, like we have weird sort of cushy music. If you look at Latin America in the 70s when they were really suffering, they have this most incredible, beautiful, it's kind of protest music and it's kind of just beautiful music. So also, I play no instruments. My parents and my grandparents both got me a recorder when I was little. I learned how to play Do a Deer and Mary Had a Little Lamb by myself, and then made no progress after that. I had trouble fingering. I had no lessons. And nobody ever forced me to take piano or guitar or violin or anything like that. And nor did I get obsessed with learning how to play guitar so I could pick up ladies later. So there was kind of none of that in my life, but I've always loved music. And then there's one piece of music that reliably makes me cry, which is The Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan, one of their multiple operettas. And it's because my dad had a few favorite pieces of classical music that he would play for me, one of which was The Mikado. And at one point, I'm pretty sure it was The Mikado, he had a guest or a friend over, and they were downstairs in the living room. I was upstairs playing, and he bet his friend that if he put, I think it was The Mikado on the turntable at the time, that I would be downstairs within 5 minutes. And he won. And then I've discovered only in the last year a really good Substack newsletter by Ted Gioia, who is a music industry analyst, who runs really, really deep, is super interesting, points to all kinds of interesting things. the link I was looking for a moment ago was to the actual Substack, because I've got a whole bunch of his individual newsletters in my brain. But I'll post the Substack there in a moment. And I should also recommend Ned Sublette and his Post Mambo mailing list. Ned Sublette is a historian. He and his wife wrote the American Slave Coast, which is a really, really great history of the slave era and the slave industry in America. It's a kind of a no-holds-barred expose of that. And I didn't know that about him when I met him in person, when April and I went to Havana to give talks at the same conference he spoke at. But he is one of the people, he's one of the reasons that Cuban music made it out of Cuba during the embargo. He would travel to Cuba. He knew everybody. He has a little band and plays music himself. And he just kept touring Cuba, meeting all the great players, and then connecting them up, and started publishing some of their records and so forth, and getting them out. So I will put his name in as well. And with that, I am complete, and would love to pass to whoever would like to take the stage, so to speak, in any manner you would like, approaching the topic of music. Please, Stuart, the stage is yours.
Thank you. You inspired me, Jerry, when you started to talk about early experiences with music. I was all set and so excited about taking drum lessons. I was probably 10 years old. I thought it was all set up for a drum teacher. It was, one of these holidays, and I went off someplace with my parents to visit another relative, and just the music lesson never happened. And I had this fantasy that the thought of someone with a lot of energy playing drums in the house was something that my mother did not really want to live with. And so the lesson got kiboshed in some way. That's my fantasy. And I never had a follow-up discussion to get down to what really happened. Flash forward through certain instances in my life, being the percussion has always kind of emerged naturally in different contexts. In the mid-90s, my buddy Peter used to take his woodworking studio and open up the last Saturday of every night, and people would come and make music. They would bring instruments, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I used to kind of play percussion. Peter also was a great teacher in terms of teaching me to share the stage with other people. It was a great lesson, not just for music, but also for speaking, etc. And not that long ago, maybe 3 months ago, there's a local there's a guy who performs at this local place in Alameda called Spiesenkower. They have kind of country music, and this guy who's got a very wonderful international reputation was playing his guitar with his 2 pieces in backup, and the guy is really an excellent musician. And I was sitting at a front row table, and I started doing my percussive things. And he actually acknowledged me for that as being you're a really good percussionist. So that was pretty cool. In terms of music, it's always been a big and important part of my life, in terms of, you put it on and it changes your mood. And one of my go-to people is Jackson Browne. Often in times when my mood is not that great, because there's something about his music. It's a quality of the musicality, and also the incredible insight in the lyrics. His social commentary is just extraordinary and, usually ahead of his time. And he's also just a great pop artist, because usually his albums are kind of half pop and half profound stuff. So thank you for this topic, Jerry. It's just lovely to talk about.
Thank Pete.
I forgot. Pete, thank you for the topic. And I can tell you're interested because of your rapt listening and the expressions on your face. So who wants the baton? Oh, and one last thing. I have I've carried this great sense that if we're really to transform the world, let's all get all the progressive musicians together. I mean, I think we all remember in this demographic Live Aid and things like that. I mean, I think it's time to revise that, and I think there's a lot of people wanting to get out there and share their profound insight and the quality of what and the resonance of what music does to the physical being.
One of the nice things about food and music is that they're politically neutral and they're lovely meeting places for people. They're places where people who might think very differently can enjoy things together, appreciate things, etc. So there might be a way that music can rebind us in different ways.
Yeah, there's no greater feeling than being, up on your feet in some kind of concert and just, in a little bit of a sea of people enjoying the vibrations.
Mr. Heavenstride.
Well, Stuart brought up Jackson Browne, so I've been a huge Jackson Browne fan. In fact, my license plate is HLDOUT. Hold out or held out. Never seen him a bunch of times. I've had ideas for this Sunrise in Washington, and his song Looking East. He talks about standing in the ocean with the sun burning low in the west, because he's obviously the east or left coast there. And when I first heard the song, I immediately thought of the Lincoln Memorial at sunrise, because the mall is set up, Abraham Lincoln is looking due east, so kind of facing the sun. So that's kind of been my major thing. Yeah, so it's some weird with the sunrise in Washington, because there's also a metaphorical time with it, and I realized this metaphorical time, and it was July 22nd, 2009, because I was supposed to go to the Jackson Browne concert, and I just was so overwhelmed I ended up not going. But July 2009 maps to 5:42 a.m. and I did a search, and that's the earliest sunrise in Washington D.C. and stuff. So it's just weird. So I'll post a link to a playlist that I put together years ago. I had attended a network of spiritual progressives conference in 2006. It was Rabbi Lerner and Cornel West had kind of organized the group and kind of inspired a playlist and stuff. So I'll post that. As far as my personal stuff, played the piano and French horn when I was in K-12 and things, and marching band, and just a lot of wonderful experiences from that. One time at band camp, I'll leave those those out, but I'll stop there and let others.
Thank you. Mike.
Thank you. And Carl, thank you for mentioning sunrise over the Washington Mall. For for the last 3 years, I've been living less than a mile from there, and it is often where I go when I run in the sunrise. Lots of pictures. I'm going to take a totally different tack on this because I am not a member of the music religion, and or at least I don't practice it every day like good religious people are supposed to do. Kathleen, on the other hand, is very much into music, and I think should have it going constantly in our house from dawn to dusk, except that we have to get some work done and we're always Zooming. But I do love music. I started in the second grade with piano lessons, like so many other people. And unlike so many other people, I stuck with it for 6 years.
Oh, buy solar if you live in California.
So anyway, the outcome of that, though, was very interesting. There were the spiritual benefits, and I loved creating music, and I learned so much about history, not just the history of music, but the history of the ages that these composers were writing. Learned things like that the Eroica Symphony by Beethoven was dedicated to Napoleon, who he thought was a hero, and later crossed that out after Napoleon turned out to be such a rapacious and brutal emperor. But the interesting thing is that in high school, I learned a little bit about the practical benefits of my piano lessons. And again, I'm not going to go down the spiritual side. I'm going to spend a little more time talking about the geeky side. I was part of the intelligentsia in our high school. You could call it, we didn't call ourselves that, but we were the 5% that were going to the best colleges. And many of us went out of state to go to places that we were fortunate enough to get into. But it turned out that the two things that we all had in common, and this is a sample set of 20 people, we all had piano lessons as kids. And that taught us discipline and taught us to persevere. It's a little bit like the marshmallow test, I guess. And the other thing was that we all had parents who put limits on our television viewing. In some cases, they were pretty liberal. We just had to, watch less than 2 hours a day. Or other people were much more strict and only got to watch cartoons on Saturday morning. But it was interesting that those two things were universal, and that was part of the discipline that music taught us. I've always been very geeky about music. I was always in that category of loving music that very few other people liked. My first album was a combination of electronic synthesizer music and classical. I bought Switched on Bach by Walter Wendy Carlos, one of the pioneers and one of the most successful early producers of synthesizer music. But I always enjoyed introducing Switched on Bach to other people, both classical fans and rock and roll fans and folk fans. They all were horrified. But anyway, I evolved. I've gotten much more interested in world music, and Kathleen drags me to every Springsteen concert we can go to. And I agree, it's all about the sharing. That's the part that makes me most excited. It's about moving with the music, and in some cases, finding common ground with somebody who loves that music and has nothing else in common with me. But thanks for doing this. I think this is a great way to get us off of the apocalypse. Maybe music will prevent the apocalypse. If not, I'm sure there'll be a great soundtrack produced.
Ride of the Valkyries already accompanies it.
Well, that's the other thing that's seared into my brain. Do you know about the Caltech tradition?
No.
This is at Caltech, they used to have finals in class. So back in the 60s and 70s, in order to make sure everybody woke up at 7 o'clock in order to get to class, everybody in every dorm turned on their stereo at full volume, tuned into the little low wattage radio station we had, and they all played The Ride of the Valkyries at the same time. And the result is that every student who went to Caltech was subjected to this experience 20 times, Monday through Friday. Actually, no, 40 times, because we had 2 finals a week each year. And we had 5 days of The Ride of the Valkyrie. And the result is that we all have an involuntary reaction to that. A Caltech grad went to the moon, and Harrison Schmitt, Apollo 17, was fast asleep in the capsule, and the mission control people decided to play The Ride of the Valkyries to wake him up. His heart rate went off scale, 165. His breathing got really tense, and it was the best demonstration I've ever seen of just how visceral the reaction can be to just 3 or 4 notes. But yeah, that's I don't know if it's Ride of the Valkyries or some of the soundtrack from Apocalypse Now, but there's a lot of good candidates for soundtrack for the Apocalypse. Thank you for letting me blather on. I just wanted to share a very different perspective from a classical music geek who really has to learn to sit and listen to music more.
That was a perfect different perspective. Thanks, Mike. Really, and I did not know about the Caltech finals tradition. That's really cool. Mr. Homer.
Well, since you mentioned his name, I will say that when I was 16 years old, I saw Bruce Springsteen play at the Lewiston Armory in Lewiston, Maine. I had 3rd row seats. I was on the aisle. He had a really long cord on his guitar. He jumped off the stage, ran down, and shook everybody's hand. And I shook Bruce Springsteen's hand when I was 16 years old. And I've watched it many times since then because, man, I didn't know. But
did it change your life?
No, but it's a good story. It's a bonding story. Another bonding story I have is many years ago I went to what was then Kimball's East in the East Bay, and I saw Lionel Hampton play. And Lionel Hampton was 86 years old, and he shuffled out on stage, and I thought, oh man, this is going to be a bust, And he picked up his mallets and he started to play his vibes, and within 3 or 4 minutes he was transformed. He was young, he was limber, he was moving and fluid. And there's this black guy sitting at the table next to me, and in between songs we looked at each other and he went, man, it just doesn't get any better than this, does it? And I was like, no, it does not. It was a total awe moment of watching a legend. This guy was on stage with Benny Goodman in Carnegie Hall in 1938, and Gene Krupa hit his drum cymbal so hard the cymbal flew off, and Hampton was playing, reached up, grabbed it, dropped it, kept on playing. It's like just chill, spine tingling stuff. I have to say, I don't play an instrument. I sang in chorus from elementary school through high school. Love to sing, love music. I had a great music teacher. He was in my junior high school and high school music teacher. So we migrated from junior high to high school at the same time, same year. And I can still remember in 6th grade, he said, all right, everybody close your eyes and just listen to this. And he dropped the needle on George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is amazing, amazing music. And he taught me a lot about appreciating classical music. I didn't know much about it, and it lit me up around classical music. And of course I love, classic rock, and I've really gotten into jazz over the years and a lot of world music. My favorite, possibly my favorite instrument these days is the kora, the African kora. If you don't know it, it's a really large round gourd with a big neck on it, and I think there's 36 strings or something, and they play it. It's an amazing sound. Excuse me, my wife is bringing my ice because my back is injured. Thank you. I need that. Let's see what else. There's a fantastic movie called Music from the Inside Out. It was made by HBO. I don't know if it's available anywhere or streaming, but they asked the members of the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra, what is music? And they're like, wow, that's a really interesting question. What is music? And you hear each one of these people talk about their experience of music. And interestingly, almost everybody in that orchestra has a side gig. That's their main income. But, you know, like there's a trombone player plays in the Dixieland Jazz Band, and, you know, the violinist plays in their own string quartet. And it's just really a lovely, lovely film to explore what music is. I could go on. I can talk about music for forever. I have over 36,000 tracks in my musical library, which is now all transported onto a little 2 terabyte drive, and I'm still getting more. But I want to share one of my favorite songs. There's so many, but I'll just share a little bit of one of my favorite songs. You'll probably recognize this guy's voice right away because it's very recognizable. So, and I also think that all of us being of this age, you'll also appreciate the lyrics. Can you hear that? Maybe you know what this is?
Everyone's a winner, bargains galore. That's right, you too can be the proud owner. The quality goes in before that name goes on. 1/10 of a dollar.
Correct.
1/10 of a dollar. We got service after the sale. How about perfume? We got perfume. How about an engagement ring? Some for the little lady, some for the little lady, some for the little lady. $3-4. We got a year-end clearance. We got our white sale and a smoke damaged furniture. You can drive it away today. Act now, act now, and receive is our gift. Our gift to you. They come in all colors. One size fits all. No muss, no fuss, no spills. You tired of kitchen drudgery? Everything must go. Going out of business, going out of business, going out of business. Sale. 50% off original retail price. Skip the middleman.
Anyway, oh, sorry, hold on. That's a great example of someone using their voice as a saxophone. I listen to that track over and over, and that guy is playing sax with his voice. There's also a great line in there where he talks about the heartbreak of psoriasis, and he goes, "Christ, you don't know the meaning of heartbreak, buddy." You know, just always cracks me up. And the last story I want to tell is from this weekend. I went to hear, actually 2 stories. I went to Green Music Center up at Sonoma State, which is an amazing building. It's one of the greenest buildings ever built. Fantastic concert hall. And I heard a group called San Salvador, which is from southern France. And they have a very interesting dialect. And they sing really complex rhythms and harmonies. And 2 of them are drummers. And I don't know if people will get this, but it was like Kitka, which does these Balkan traditional Balkan songs, meeting a cantor, meeting Paul Pena, who did tube and throat singing, meeting the taiko drummers. It was really amazing. It was a wall of sound when I walked in, and I just got chills. I hadn't heard anything like that in a really long time. And I also saw Alistair Fraser and Natalie Hawes. And Alistair's a Scottish fiddler, and he told a great story. He said he had a friend who got a chance to talk to the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama is known for not spending any time with people who don't know what they want to ask. So you got to get your question right, you know, because he's too busy. So if you go, he walks past you, right? And the guy says, well, you know, Your Holiness, what are we going to do? You know, the world is so polarized and people are so quick to judge. And you know, how do we bring peace to this world? And to his surprise, the Dalai Lama started to laugh. He laughed and laughed and laughed. And then he giggled and he turned to me and he said, more festivals. And I think that's actually a fantastic thing, that if we had more music festivals, I think there would be more peace in the world. And I saw recently someone saying, and it's a really good way to get to a 4-day work week, is to every year start to institute a couple more holidays until you have holidays spread throughout the entire year where everybody's got, you know, 1 day week off. And we could have music festivals on those days. So that's my take on music for the moment. Thank you for letting me talk.
And thank you. 2 tiny notes you just inspired. One, Argentina under Perón tried that. Like they had the day of the student, day of the housewife, day of the what. They had like 50 holidays by the time Perón was like taken out. and it went down the tubes. But we're entering an era right now where the 32-hour work week is like on the horizon apparently, and other forces might actually take us there. But it didn't work in that setting many decades ago. And then the other thing it makes me think, you made me think of, is I'm very interested in things like deep canvassing, anything that's different from shotgun mass mailings of political contribution pleas and pouring money into the TV system, and regular canvassing, which is just like door knocking, but leaving a brochure and leaving. And deep canvassing is just slowing down and taking 45 minutes or an hour to have a conversation. And it seems to me maybe a really nice entry point would be, what is your favorite song in the world? And forget politics for a second. Just go up and say hi and ask. And not everybody will have an answer. Most people won't object. And you could have a really lovely conversation and walk away. That might be like a really interesting way of doing political canvassing or something like that. I don't know. We're just not doing anything to build relationships, and it makes me really sad. And when I get all these solicitations to pour money into media, into ad campaigns, it makes me sad and angry. Doug C. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'm going to frame this with reminding us that Plato said that you can understand a society by understanding its music. And I always thought that the music that we have is actually a fairly harsh judgment on where we've come to as a society. Now, having said that, in high school, Elvis and the Beatles and Andre Segovia's long-playing Bach Chaconne came out about the same time. And in listening to them, I decided that I was going to go the Bach direction. So that resonated throughout my life over and over again. I'll tell just a couple of stories. At one point, living in Washington, oh, by the way, I was at Caltech and also went through the finals with the Ride of the Valkyries. Pretty amazing time. Well, in Washington, my then wife and I bought a nice house and had a great living room. And we decided it needed a grand piano. So I called up a friend of mine who was a pianist. And he said, I know exactly what you want. It'll take me 3 months to find it, but I'll do it. Hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, he called back and said, I've got the piano for you because I'm actually moving to Europe and I don't need mine. So I'll sell you that one. So we made a deal, hung up the phone, and I totally forgot about it. 3 weeks later, this truck pulls into the driveway and it says on the side, piano movers. And I thought, oh, holy shit, what is it? I don't even know what color it is, what kind of piano it is. So these guys rolled in this huge box into the living room and opened it up. And it was a 1906 Steinway grand piano, 9 feet long. We set it up and it was just amazing. The trouble is neither of us played the piano. So I called up a friend of mine who was taking piano lessons. He said, yeah, I've got this guy who's in the National Symphony and he's from the Moscow Conservatory, call him. So I called him up and we arranged for a deal. And he came over to the house and in his heavy Russian accent, he said, sit at the piano. So I sat down. He said, do you know where middle C is? I said, yes. He said, play middle C. So I reached over and tinkled on middle C. He said, no. He said, when you touch the key, you must feel the wheel come off the ground to the back end of the piano. It was the greatest music lesson I ever had. It's all connected. It was just powerful. With the experience in high school with Segovia, I went to Tijuana and spent $18 on a guitar. And it sat in that house for 2 years before I did anything with it. And one night I decided, that's ridiculous. I had a piece of Villalobos music and a little book that said, this note goes on this fret on this string. So I spent the whole night working through how to do the Villalobos piece on the piano. By the morning, I had learned how to read music and my fingers were a bloody mess. But it was fun. There are a lot more stories. Oh, well, just on the guitar. Segovia actually came to Berkeley when I was a graduate student and did a master class. And it turned out you could audit. So I spent 2 weeks listening to him and his 8 students playing. One of them stayed behind when he left, and he became my teacher. And so I learned pretty good classical technique, and think it's just an extraordinary thing. So I'll stop there.
These are great stories, Doug, and everybody's got great stories. I'm going to hit return. And then I'm going to post another message. I would actually like to do like a regular call, music show and tell kind of, because I can kind of just scratch the surface like today in a call like this, and would love to do it. Keep doing it. I was at Caltech 79, 80, 81, two school years, and I still have ride scars too. At that time, most finals,
Didn't
at least
realize
the
that
ones,
that entitled me to a
most most of the finals I took were actually take-home tests, and you could take them kind of whenever. So I would find like an abandoned, not abandoned, but a completely empty big theater classroom kind of thing, and take it in the middle of the night. That was when it was most quiet for my brain, like not a lot of distraction going on. So I loved that Caltech would trust me taking a final take home. It was a special time. And then also at that time, people were getting massive stereos. It was a big stereo boom. And in my house, there was a guy, entrepreneur, who ended up being a really big entrepreneur, Bill Gross. But at the time, his entrepreneurial efforts were all about making speakers. And he sold speakers to Caltech people and also to anyone around Pasadena or whatever. So we had my house had an especially high concentration of like these massive, like very powerful, very, very well designed speakers with big amplifiers connected to them. So when the ride went off, it was like an earthquake. It was quite an event. So unlike Mike, I didn't stick with my piano lessons. I was kind of actually naturally, I have a natural aptitude for piano, and it got burned out of me pretty significantly by getting music lessons, because the teacher was always rapping my knuckles and saying you have to hold them this way and that way, and I for whatever reason I had to bike to the music lesson, and I loved biking, but it got cold and my hands were cold when I got to class. And so I really got turned off from music and music making and stuff like that for probably a decade, which is kind of really sad. And maybe I shouldn't have let myself get turned off, but I did. So I really like pipe organs and pianos as instruments. And I play MIDI pianos and MIDI pipe organs on my iPad with a MIDI keyboard. And a lot of the quality of music and sound for me is actually the how well it's done. So in all aspects, kind of how well things were recorded, how much frequency response there is, how like what the sound, the noise level is, that kind of stuff. All the way through to like careful lyrics and careful production and things like that. So I get kind of like physically, it physically hurts to hear like crappy music or like music kind of stuff that's not well produced, or stuff coming through a crappy speaker or something like that. It's like just nails on a chalkboard. And I want to like just go like this and not hear it. And conversely, and even a live live music experience, if it's not well done, it's actually less fun for me than being at home alone with really good sound, really good speakers, and clean sound. And it seems counterintuitive to me because music should be all about being with people and things like that. But a lot of the experience for me is the kind of the physical sensations and the carefulness of the sound. So it's a weird thing. Um, uh, I like dance music, and when I say that, it's always the music I like is dance, in the 1600s, dance in the 1700s, dance in the 1800s, and the 1900s, and the 1940s, and the 50s, and so it's kind of an odd thing. When I realized a lot of the music I like lots of different kinds of music, but a lot of it is also dance music. And then my recent favorite, my favorite recent music is a cappella pop songs. So I love that people can do the musicality and the careful instrumentation kind of pop music just with voices. So I'm really fascinated by that. I guess I put some YouTube lists and channels here. If you look at that favorite songs channel playlist, sorry, you'll kind of get an idea of some of the things I like. I don't know if that's important or not. I find that music, kind of like art and kind of like travelogue slides, back in the day when we used to have slide projectors and carousels, other people's favorite things may or may not resonate with you. And some of my favorite things are really, really, really important to me. And somebody else is like, yeah, okay, that's kind of nice. Or yeah, I don't really like it. And I'm cool with that. I think it's really cool that different people have different preferences, but it makes it hard to share. I've found, this one is really important to me, and I don't know why. It's the way the lyrics work, or the way the song was sung, or some of the production details, or the sparseness. I've got one song I love just because you can hear the piano mechanism. So the damper, actually, you can hear it so loudly in the piece. It was kind of a self-produced thing, and somebody playing really, really good soulful piano very slowly. And the characteristic of the recording for me, a lot of it is the pedal. It's like, okay, Pete, why is that cool? And I don't get it. So it has been a joy and a wonder to me over the past like 5 or 10 years, finding stuff on YouTube that people are making music and sharing music and talking about the way music is put together, and the way tonal harmony works, or the way music theory works, and different takes on it. So like, over the last 5 or 10 years, it feels like I've had this wonderful ad hoc kind of university graduate level music course through YouTube. And it's just like, that's like one of the best things in my life ever. It's really amazing what you can listen to nowadays, and the people who can share stuff. So I especially like, there's a band called Scary Pockets, which is kind of related to Pamplemousse. Scary Pockets and Pamplemousse both are co-fronted by the guy who's founder and CEO of Patreon, oddly enough. Scary Pockets is something where they've got a few regular members, and then they've got guest members, and they've got an amazing production sound guy. And they do stuff live. So they practice together for maybe an hour or two or something like that, and then they play kind of in one take. And it's just amazing, the level of the sound quality and the level of playing and the cross communication between the players. Something I just love. And then the second message, YouTubers, music analysis, making, and stuff like that. This is a kind of some of my top faves in music. And I've learned a lot from Adam Neely and Andrew Huang. Anthony Marinelli he just popped up on the scene, I think, but he's an old synthesizer guy, and he's like, I was there when I was helping Michael Jackson Michael Jackson told me what he wanted to hear out of the synth, and I got it for him. So he's got some amazing stories. Charles Cornell is a funny guy. Music analysis again. There's a couple musicians in here who are goofballs. So Davey 504 is a bass player, and he's really, really good, and he's a goofball. And Mark Rebollet is even more of a goofball. But both of them have this like amazing ability to do music. And so most of their music videos are probably junk to me, but there's a few where they do their thing, and it's just awesome. There's through this list, there's about 5 of those people I follow because because they make music on synthesizers, or especially iOS or iPad, especially the Sound Test Room. Doug at the Sound Test Room has demoed deep demos of like almost every app on the iPad that does any kind of music. So along with YouTube, another amazing thing that is present, in the last 5 or 10 years and will be for a while is you can take your iPad and you can buy, for $20, you can buy what usually would cost you $200 or $300 of a software app. And it's usually very similar. The same people make it, and it's a very similar version of it. You can stock up a home studio for a few $100s on an iPad. That's just mind-blowing in its capability and its usability. And it's it's super funny to me that I think most people probably don't know that, and most people don't take advantage of that. And I actually, in my life, I don't make enough time for sitting down and making music with my iPad. But between they call it digital audio workstations, they've got like big fancy music production things. Usually people use a Mac for it, but you can get a kind of a cut down version that still works pretty well on an iPad. Between the DAWs and the various keyboard kinds of things and synthesizers and samplers. So I've got access to amazing pipe organ sounds because somebody spent a lot of time recording pipe organs, and now I can play them on my MIDI keyboard and iPad. It's just mind blowing. And so I have this vision every once in a while. I realize how cool all the gear I've got is on literally just my iPad and a MIDI keyboard, and a bunch of software, a bunch of apps. It's like I want to grab parents by the lapel and say, oh my God, because if I had a piano, thank goodness, in my house when I was growing up, and it meant a lot to me. I grew up with it. But if somebody had given 12-year-old Pete an iPad and a MIDI keyboard, it would have blown my mind, and I would have just done music for the rest of my life, and made amazing, wonderful music.
We would be talking in your green room right now after your show.
Exactly.
Like,
yes.
hanging out.
And it's like, so parents, give your kids an iPad and a MIDI keyboard and some headphones, and and even if 2 out of 100 or something catch on, that would be an awesome thing for the world. Thanks for listening. I hope we get to do this again.
Yeah.
That was quite the tour. Gil, take your time stepping in.
Yeah.
Let us marinate for a moment in everything Pete shared.
Marinating in the delicious. Pete, thank you. This is just absolutely wonderful. I was not planning to talk this morning because I've got to head off to a doctor's appointment in a few minutes. Boy, my first reaction is I have no favorite music because I just love music. And every time I try to think of a favorite, it's just like it's a wash in everything else. I would say that for most of my life, I would say I love every kind of music except opera. My in-laws are seriously major scientists who are seriously major opera geeks who traveled the world going to opera, and they've taken us to a few, and it's opened a world to me that I just ignored and dismissed before. So I guess I love everything. My experience in this call is just being awash in memories. It's like a Marcel Proust thing. It's like, one thing is leading to another, is leading to another, is leading to another. And I think I could talk for 2 hours maybe three, about what's been moving and fascinating to me about this, and I'm not going to do that. But let me say a few things. My first memory of music was two albums that my mother, who was deeply into classical music and jazz in the 50s, played for me. One was Peter and the Wolf, narrated by Sterling Holloway, actor, remarkable voice in his own right. And it was just, vivid and, music and narration that produced movies in my mind as like a 3-year-old or 2-year-old or something like that. And the other was an album called Rusty and Orchestraville, which was again an introduction and orientation to music and a delight for me as a kid. I think we still have it somewhere in the house here. My story about my childhood is that I was cursed with progressive parents who didn't force me to take piano like everybody else. And I really regret that they didn't, Pete, for the reasons that you said and that others have talked about. I wanted to play trumpet. They didn't want to have a trumpet player in the house, understandably. And their compromise was accordion, which I studied for 6 months and had no interest in. And that was that until the folk music revival of the early 60s, when I started playing guitar. My dad got me guitar lessons with a guy in the neighborhood who wanted to take me through the basic fundamentals, scales and music theory and so forth. And I had no interest in it because I just wanted to play folk songs. I learned later he was a major jazz guitarist, and it was another missed opportunity to go deep. I was in high school and college in the 60s and was awash with music. I've never been as awash with music, I think, as I was then. It was sort of, central organizing experience of everything. And in particular, oh gosh, must be 67, 60, one after another. And I remember the day that my friend Jerry Leischling came over to the apartment and said, you got to sit down, you got to listen to this right now and put on the first Crosby, Stills and Nash album. And it was just like mind-blowing. Same experience with the first Joni Mitchell album. A friend brought it to me. My dad was away. We dropped acid in our apartment in New York and listened to that and couldn't tell what was on the album and what was coming in from the street, but transformed, remarkable experience. And Joni Mitchell has been close to my heart ever since. I was a music critic in college for my college paper. Went to lots and lots of concerts, free passes. I mean, we couldn't afford the $3 that it cost to get into see the Grateful Dead in those days. But did a lot of music criticism until one night I remember I came home, sat down at my table because I was on deadline, and found that I didn't want to digest the experience. I didn't want to label it, characterize it, describe it. I just wanted to be in it. And I stopped doing that at that point. I mean, I've rolled through about 30 stories listening to you all, and none of them are coming back right now, except what to say. Lots of concerts, lots of Springsteen, Grateful Dead, a lot less music in my life in the 80s and 90s, I guess. No interest in autotune. Great interest in Rhapsody in Blue, whoever mentioned that before. We just listened to 10 different versions of it Monday night. What started that was stumbling across Yuja Wang playing it. I don't know if people know her, Chinese pianist, moved to the United States when she was 15. Remarkable stuff. And probably along with Bernstein's, one of my favorites of Rhapsody in Blue. And a request to you, finders of things, there's a music video of Rhapsody in Blue in black and white, set in a diner with a tango mood, and it's breathtaking, and we have not been able to find it. So if that's enough of a clue for anybody to surface it, go at that. And for some reason, the one that's rising to memory now is hearing Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony in, I think, Augsburg, Austria, in the foothills of the Alps. And it was a completely different experience than I've ever heard it before. So many, many more things to say. I've got to leave for the doctor. I'll stay on phone to listen to the rest of you. Thank you, Pete, so much for this provocation. I'd love to do this again and just sort of let it roll. And what I might do is actually sit down and try to, dictate or write an article of this whole 74-year span of music and what it's done to me. So thank you.
I just want to add on to what Gil said there at the end. If we do this again, maybe we could each put together our top 5 songs, one for 5 different genres, and post that so that we could look at them ahead of time, and then we'd all be able to share, wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much. So just an idea.
I'm going to enjoy the silence until someone else wants to step in and fill it.
Would that be the sounds of silence?
Yeah. A very quick tidbit before Julian. I put together a playlist on a cassette when I taught at Esalen in the late 90s. It was about a dozen songs, mostly about love. And I listened to it recently, and it's still a very, very powerful, powerful piece and teaching tool. And I remember reveling in using that as part of teaching. Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to say was The Sound of Silence, I think, would make it easily into any top hits. I read an article recently about how that was written, and it turns out it was about Art Garfunkel's very good friend who was blind. And the gist of it is that he was leading them through Grand Central Station, that's a place in New York, I think, to take the train somewhere. And their history was that Garfunkel would always have his friend's arm, so he had reassurance where he was going. And then they were in the station, and Garfunkel let go. And it turned out that the guy was able to make it home on his own, where he found that Garfunkel had been by him the entire time. And so the song was written about the impact of the sound of silence on his blind friend. So that was interesting. So I was going to mention my own background with music. My parents got me started early, which I think should be done for everybody, on pop organ and violin. I rapidly realized that many of the players in the school were much better at me than violin. And I switched to viola. That one was more suitable. I ended up as first viola in the city orchestra, but didn't really continue it until suddenly in college, when I spent the summer in Europe looking at pipe organs all around the cathedrals in Europe, and realized that's what was really good for me. So in my computer science major was accompanied by a pipe organ minor. And both my senior thesis was a system to visualize Baroque music. Now, this is in 1977. The technology at the time was pen plotters, if you know what those are. So I had to come up with a way of digitally describing music, and then convince a professor to give me time on the computer system to get the pen plots done. I actually had the faculties of 2 departments thinking I was a bit crazy for doing this, but being Berkeley, both departments actually supported me. And in fact, I ended up with the chairman of the music department being my sponsor, and I was the only non-music department student authorized to play the concert organ in the concert hall, because he was convinced I was seriously studying it. With regards to this thesis, I was cleaning out garage looking for artifacts during the summer, and found it, and found some of the plots that had been done. So I've resurrected my thesis, and I have to figure out what to do with it, publish as a PDF. For those of you who know who Don Knuth is, he was considered the god of computer science, but when he was young, he was contemplating being a music major. So he's still a pipe organist, although he ended up picking computer science as his main forte. If you can imagine, 2 months ago, I was having dinner with him, and he was grilling me about my senior thesis. If you can imagine what it's like as to be grilled by God about what you did as a 21-year-old. So that was a tiring experience, but really good. So there was the thesis it's a half-inch thick, right? But it's also accompanied by a bunch of drawings. So I have to figure out how to put that together and then make it available somehow. So I think it's interesting to see the combination of 1977 level computer graphics and Baroque music, and what the department would let an undergraduate do with those two.
When you've done that, please share that back with us. And I bet one or two people in OGM have an interesting clue about where to post it, where to put it, where to contribute it, something like that.
Okay.
Also, I long ago on a planet far, far away, I had Xerox PARC as a client. And at one point, I wish I remembered who this was. One of the men in the department invited me to his place for dinner, I think. I don't remember anything else other than walking into his living room where there was a major organ. And he had a cathedral ceiling living room on purpose because the pipes in the organ were that high, and proceeded to sit down and play some organ music at home because he designed the home around this thing. It was beautiful. I was just really struck. I don't remember his face, don't remember anything else, but seeing the organ.
It's nice when you're able to do that. Knuth also has an organ in his living room. As for me, like Pete, I have synthesizers upstairs. I actually use a Corgam 1, which is a synthesized sample player. But you turn up the speakers, man, and those samples are good. So if you're familiar with Vidor's Fifth Organ Symphony, especially the toccata, when you turn up the volume on that thing and get going, it's almost to the point where it makes the neighbors come over to see what's going on. So.
We've gone this far and nobody's mentioned Ableton, although Pete mentioned DAWs, digital audio workstations. And I posted a video of a French guy named Madeon, who's playing a sample, and the song is called my 30 Favorite Songs. And he composes a beautiful original song out of his 30 favorite songs. And I saw that years ago, and I was just blown away. That people can map random tunes to a keyboard that can switch contexts at the flash of a button, and do this over and over. And sometimes the keyboard plays like a keyboard because there's a sequence of keys. Sometimes it plays, whatever you've sampled, etc. The flexibility of mind it takes to do that. And then Jacob Collier playing the multi-instrumentalist who makes audiences be his sound gear and so forth. Also amazing. There's some incredibly virtuosic music out there that's not just virtuosic for being like way out there, but also beautiful to listen to. Anyone else? Did we shake any other memories loose? And it feels like this is a well we can dip into again, like other people would like to come back to this topic. Cool.
So, yeah, so I have a story.
Please.
My first wife's mother went to Juilliard and studied piano before she went into the family schmata business. If anybody doesn't know what the word schmata means, I'm happy to. Jerry is happy to post a link to what it means. And she had this beautiful, early 1900s Steinway baby grand piano. It's a beautiful piece of wood. It was a light brown, not light brown, but medium brown wood. And you don't see that, or I'd never seen that often. It was just a beautiful piece of furniture, but nobody played. My wife's cousin was actually pretty good and went to the Berklee School of Music. And at some point in time, we let her take this piano to North Carolina. because she was studying music after leaving Berkeley or flunking out or something like that, and decided to have the piano for a while, and then she wouldn't give it back. And I was practicing law at the time and decided that at some point in time the piano was stolen. And so rather than use the civil system, which can take forever, you can have a warrant sent out and the local authorities will pick up the piano. And I used that as kind of a threat, and we were able to get the piano back. And then, by that time, we had divorced, but remained very, very good friends. And she had the piano completely reconditioned, and installed a player mechanism on it that she could put CDs in, and you get live music from the piano. And it was kind of a beautiful experience. And I was really happy to be able to facilitate that.
Super cool. Stacy.
Yeah. So my first experience of music that I remember is my mother singing to me. And one was a Yiddish lullaby, and the other one was how deep is the ocean? I think that was Lena Horne. And she would sing, and I would cry and ask her to sing it again. So it's always been the lyrics that I've been most connected to. But when I was 10 and we bought a house, I wanted to play piano. And my dad went out and he bought this French provincial white, beautiful baby grand piano. It was used, but it was really more a piece of furniture than anything else. And they got me a teacher, much like the one that Doug described, who had me playing by Mir Bistashane and All My Loving after the first two lessons. The problem is I could not read music. So I memorized the whole thing, which was very stressful. In addition, the man smelled really, really bad, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I used that as an excuse to get my parents to let me quit. And meanwhile, they had just bought this big piano. So they got me another teacher, which was like the teacher that Pete went to, who wanted me to just practice going back and forth, and I was not doing that. So the piano is still in the living room after all these years. But when I had kids, I had a friend who was dying, and she needed money, and she was getting rid of her piano. And it was basically, she had to pay to get them to have it taken away. So I bought the piano from her, and my son taught himself to play beautifully, and then taught my daughter to play. So they can both play, but I have no talent. That's the piano story. And there was one more thing. Oh, when I was a substance abuse counselor, I always used music to help people connect to their memories, which we just saw how effective it is now. And the last thing, Jackson Brown, Late for the Sky. I must have listened to that like 1,000 times as I was processing and going through my divorce. Sometimes the lyrics just perfectly match exactly the message that you have to, that you're hanging on to in your heart. And my favorite song that has no lyrics is Europa by Santana. And that just brings me alive. And favorite instrument is the saxophone. And I am complete.
I have two more stories that this evoked. One was my girlfriend in late 80s, early 90s, was a second cousin of, now I'm blanking on the name, great iconic two American composers, two brothers. Gershwin. Yeah. Yeah. Gershwin? They were mentors to the great pianist Michael Feinstein. Yeah, is it the Gershwins? Yeah, it's the Gershwins. And yeah, so the Gershwins. Thank you. Marcia didn't have this ability as a second cousin, but her brother, played by ear, and he could just sit down and just sit down at the piano and off he went. It was actually just a beautiful thing to watch and to listen to. Mhm. Yeah. There was another story, but all of a sudden that's gone.
I was thinking of providing a slightly different tack, which is the difference between live and amplified music. Back in the 90s, Patrick Moraz, let me put in the link here, did this thing that he called the Coming Home America Tour. And his deal was for $2,000, he would show up at your venue and play a concert. Whatever the venue was, you were responsible for providing a grand piano, and he specified which types were acceptable, but that was it. So my venue was my living room, and I rented a grand piano, and Patrick showed up and he played a concert for us. Now, this guy, as I mentioned, is big time. He was the keyboardist for the Moody Blues for a decade. He was a keyboardist for Yes for a while. So I'd seen him a few times in the LA arena, Los Angeles arena, the Cal Palace in San Francisco. And these are venues with like 30,000 people. So I'm off at the arena staring through the atmosphere at this tiny little figure on the stage far, far away. Then the next time I see him, I'm standing 2 feet away from him while he's playing the piano in my living room. And it's such a completely different experience, because that is music the way it was for millennia, really, right? Is that there was no electronics in between you and the performer. And there was even one song where he had people stand around the piano and just pluck at the strings. And imagine doing that in the Cal Palace. You just can't. So he did this thing twice, and then announced to everybody regretfully he was losing a lot of money because he had to pay for all the travel expenses. So he didn't do it anymore. But man, if you get the experience to see a world-class player, just if you look at his biography, this guy is classically trained, and I'm standing next to him watching his hands playing the piano, and it was such an experience getting both the visual and the audio at the same time from this guy who's at the top of the genre. So, okay.
Well, I'm loving how all these stories are resonating for all of us and triggering other memories and other things. It's lovely. Mike, sofa is in good space, good capture.
Looks like it.
Yay.
We're filling our new house with a few more pieces of furniture. The foosball table came first. But just I have two questions, one about music and one observation. The first is, has anybody read any good books on the neuroscience of music and the physiology of music? I was struck by things that a couple people said about how music seems to be processed differently in our brain. We have these stories of 95-year-old former musicians who have lost every bit of their memory. They have dementia, Alzheimer's, maybe both. And yet you start playing something that they played 75 years ago, and they start singing along, or, they know that's embedded so far in the brain. But I see lots of anecdotes. I see magazine stories, but I'm just wondering if there's kind of a 100-page book on that phenomenon. What do we know? Why is music different? Why is it so powerful when interacting with the brain? You probably have it in your brain, but
I'm looking. I don't. I mean, I have books like The Spell of the Sensuous and A Natural History of the Senses, neither one of which I've read, but I don't think those go into this. I don't think they cover what you're asking about.
Spell of the Senses, or?
No, the Spell of the Sensuous. Let me there we go. By David Abram.
Mm-hmm.
but I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know how much he goes into music or anything like that. I'm reasonably certain that Pete is madly Googling for an answer right now. I mean, it's just a hunch, just a hunch.
He has that Google face on. Yeah.
Yeah. RGF,
And
his
that leads,
resting Google face.
yeah, two thoughts. I particularly love Japanese music and the kato, and you mentioned you mentioned the drums earlier, which is, I mean, that's a mind-boggling experience. It's not, some would say it's not really music. It's it's verbal, it's oral assault. It's, you know, the whole space is vibrating. But I'm headed to Kyoto in a week and a half, and wondering if anybody has ideas about music to see there or anything else to see there. I've been there once. I was there for 23 hours. I had 1 hour for sightseeing, which I did at 6 o'clock in the morning while jogging around the outside of all the temples that were closed. But if I'm going to have a little more time this time, but if anybody wants to put in the chat, you know, what you got to see in Kyoto or where you got to eat, I'd welcome that.
Two things for me.
I suspect very few of you have been to Kuching, Borneo.
Not yet. I was in
That goes.
I was in Kyoto a few years ago, and the temples in Kyoto completely reset my brain on temples and how they work. I was particularly struck by how different one was from the next. Like they shared a couple of design elements, but like there's the one with the big red torii gates that go right up the hillside. Like each one was mind-blowing. And here in Portland, there's a Japanese garden that is sort of a really nice place. I can't go there anymore. I've been so completely wrecked for temples that that Kyoto did that. Then there's also the Philosopher's Path, and it was raining on us when we sort of walked that area. That's really beautiful. And then the Aikido dojo that I go to here, I think I'm gonna mute Gil. The Aikido dojo that I go here, its founders, who used to live in Portland, run Kyoto Aikikai, and they're very good. So if you wanted to see some really good Aikido, you could go sit in the corner at Kyoto Aikikai. I'll put a link in and Yoko Okamoto and her husband Chris Mulligan teach there, and Yoko is probably the senior most Aikido practitioner in the world at this point, a female Aikido practitioner in the world.
Well,
and
I'm glad.
The wandering deer that are just all over the place, all around the temple and all through the streets that you can feed out of your hands. As a matter of fact, they have.
That's actually Nara that you're thinking of.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry.
Because that's the other city that we visited on that trip. And Nara has deer that ate a map out of our hands as we were sitting looking for where to go.
They can get feisty.
Yep. Kyoto doesn't have the deer everywhere.
Okay. Well, thank you. I will come back with a report in 3 weeks.
I have another story from my time at the Jersey Shore, aside from Springsteen. I became friendly with a couple, Gwen Coleman and Jerry, and for some reason, Jerry's last name is leaving me, but he was doing stand-up comedy in the Catskills at the age of 14 and 15. He would move in and out of many, many characters. And he almost got George's part in Seinfeld. He was second in the running, and they had a big choice. But his wife, Gwen Coleman, had the lead in the Magic Show on Broadway. And one night thank you, Jerry. One night we were a little tipsy, and Gwen was standing up in the back seat of my car through the sunroof and was blasting the title song with a big, huge, Broadway voice. It was kind of a very, very kind of iconic and beautiful musical moment.
Love that. Ken?
So I'm a big jazz fan, and there's a college down in San Mateo called the College of San Mateo, and they have a jazz station. And I was listening back in the 90s when Al Jazzbo Collins was one of the DJs, and he was a very famous radio DJ, broadcast on the Purple Grotto, 17 and a half stories below ground. And T. Carson was at that point the head of the Basie Band. The Basie Band still exists. They've got the playbook, and I've seen them play. They're incredible. They are still just as tight as they were under Basie. And they played my favorite Basie song, which is Blues in Hoss Flat. And I was, so for the memorial concert when Jazzbo died, they were doing this concert with the Basie Band, and I was in the third row, which placed me exactly level with the stage in the center, and they played this piece, and there's a crescendo where the sound was just resonating in every chamber in my body. I was like wired. And then I discovered this really, I am not a Jerry Lewis fan at all, but I have to share this 2.5 minute piece with you of Jerry Lewis because it's that piece of music, and it's quite extraordinary. Now, where did it go? Come on, here we go. Share sound, and let's see if this will work. Oh, great, there we go. This is from the Errand Boy. So that music live with a full orchestra just washing through was really amazing to me, and remains one of my favorite pieces to this day. And I had no idea that Jerry Lewis had that level of talent. I mean, I just was blown away when I first saw that. Like, he really was timed that well, and apparently he was a very good music arranger. So.
Thank you for dropping that into our lives. That's super cool.
We have a couple of minutes. I was going to share a story about classical music in Silicon Valley. So
please.
I want to paste a link in. If you've heard of Mark Cantor, he founded Macromind and is essentially the father of Macromedia. He was classically trained. Cantor, the family name, he was a training as a cantor at Oberlin. So he's a classically trained voice artist. He didn't graduate because he insisted on getting a dual degree in electronic music. And Oberlin, Oberlin doesn't do electronic music, so they wouldn't give him the degree, so he didn't actually graduate. But he is classically trained. And when he belts out something, Mark is big, he's like 6.5 feet tall. When he belts out something and he's a trained cantor, it shuts down. And so one night we're at this barbecue restaurant in Mountain View. Mark used to stay with me when he came out from Chicago. So we're having dinner at this restaurant because Mark was into barbecue back then. And all of a sudden he decides to sing some opera. Classically trained opera singer, big voice. And even though we're outside, it shut down the place. I mean, nobody could talk over Mark singing. So he's good at this stuff. I don't know opera, but I could tell he was in tune and knew what he was doing. And he was doing this for a couple of minutes when the door to the kitchen swings open. And there's a big burly chef. I mean, he's also 6.5 feet tall, and he looks like he doesn't take any nonsense, and he has a big meat cleaver in his hand. So he slams the screen door open, looking to see what is going on with all this noise outside in his backyard. And he sees Mark, realizes he's the source of it, and with this big meat cleaver in his hand, stomps over to the table and starts singing along with him. Turns out the cook was also a classically trained opera singer. So, for all the people who were at the restaurant that evening, they got an impromptu, basically professional opera performance.
Julian, thank you.
That's my Silicon Valley music story.
That's a beautiful story. And you just loosened another story from my head, a story that might be familiar to Pete, Ken, I don't know who else was there, but one of my favorite moments from any of the retreats I ran was a moment when we took everybody outside to a circle of trees, sat down, and the thing I thought we should talk about didn't feel right. So I said, what should we do? And somebody said, let's talk about how art has influenced our lives. And the first person who stood up, I think, was Ray Lewis. And he said, and I'm gonna retell his story, probably missing a lot of details, but I think I'll get the right angle on it. So he said, both my parents are deaf. And all of us were like, whoa, what that must be like. And he said, and I liked music a lot as a kid. So they got me a piano and they put me in classical music lessons, and I was learning a whole bunch of classical pieces, but my guilty pleasure was jazz. And so at one point I'm in my room, or I have a piano in my room, and I'm in my room and I'm playing a jazz piece that's really hard. And I finally master it. I finally get how to play it. And I kind of put my hands down and I suddenly have a feeling. I look over in the corner and my mom is sitting in the corner and she signs to me, I love it when you play that song. And I had no idea that was in the group. I had no idea that story was in us, and it was beautiful. I just remember that story. And then Sheldon Raynon told a story right after or before that one that's also still in my memory. But it's not about music, it's about cinema. Ken, go ahead.
I think it was 2010 or 2011. I was at the Wisdom 2.0 conference, and Tony Hsieh was one of the speakers. And Tony grew up here in Santa Fe, not far from me, about 5-6 miles away. And, he said, I had a tiger mom and I was trained I was playing violin. And so what I would do is I would record myself playing, and then I would play the music at full volume. And my parents thought that I was practicing when actually I was playing video games. I loved that story. I thought that was so awesome, and he managed to do okay for himself, although he left us far too soon.
Yeah.
I do have a poem, and it's by a musician. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, so I'm excited now. I just thought about an iconic restaurant in New York City called Applause, and all of the out of work Broadway folks used to sing there and act as wait staff. So they would pause and sing, just great numbers that would rivet you. And it was a great place to go to get you warmed up for musical theater, which I used to go to a lot of in the early 70s. And tomorrow morning I'm heading to New York, and 2 shows. We'll see 2 shows over the weekend. So I'm kind of excited about that. On the way to Africa, so I won't be here for 3 weeks.
Safe travels.
Thank you, Ken.
So I thought it would be appropriate, given the subject of the day, to pull up some Paul Simon lyrics. I happen to be a person who memorizes lyrics easily. I know 100. I go somewhere to saying, people say, Ken, what's the next line? I usually have it. So this is called The Cool, Cool River, and it's from the Rhythm of the Saints album, which is a very underrated album, if you ask me. Moves like a fist through traffic, anger, and no one can heal it. Shoves a little bump into the momentum. It's just a little lump, but you feel it in the creases and the shadows with a rattling deep emotion. The cool, cool river sweeps the wild, white ocean. Yes, boss, the government handshake. Yes, boss, the crusher of language. Yes, boss, Mr. Stillwater, the face at the edge of the banquet. The cool river. The cool river. I believe in the future. I may live in my car. My radio tuned to the voice of a star. Song dogs barking at the break of dawn. Lightning pushes the edge of a thunderstorm. And these old hopes and fears still at my side. Anger, and no one can heal it, slides through the metal detector. Lives like a mole in a motel or a slide in a slide projector. The cool, cool river sweeps the wild, white ocean, and the rage of love turns inward to become prayers of devotion. And these prayers are the constant road across the wilderness. These prayers of the memory of God, the memory of God. And I believe in the future, we shall suffer no more. Maybe not in my lifetime, but in yours, I feel sure. Song dogs barking at the break of dawn. Lightning pushes the edges of the thunderstorm. And these streets, quiet as a sleeping army, send their battered dreams to heaven, to the mother's restless son, who is a witness too, who is a warrior, who denies his urge to break and run, who says, hard times, I'm used to them. The speeding planet burns, I'm used to that. My life's so common it disappears. And sometimes even music cannot substitute for tears. Had to get a little apocalypse in there, Mike, just to, remind us.
That's lovely. That's a great way to wrap this call. Really appreciate it. Mike suggested we do something similar for visual arts where we could actually share lots of visuals and things. I think that's a great idea. I don't know. Maybe we do an art month or something like that. Share your thoughts about how to steer this in the Mattermost town square, please. I will post this call there later today. And I am really grateful for all of you and everything you know and feel and care about music.
And don't forget furniture.
And furniture. Ooh, nice couch.
Wow, nice.
Thank you, Pete and Jerry. Thank you,
everybody.
Pete and Jerry.
Thank you all.
everybody.
Pete, can you hold the camera up and show us that couch? Oh, never mind.
I wish.
What's that?
Is that your art, Pete?
It is Midjourney and me. Yep.
So
I
Jonathan
got to show
Coulton,
you our favorite art piece. This is from the son of a very good friend in Cyprus. And I want to challenge you to figure out what that is.
It is the Doors of Hell from the chapel in
Hold on,
Florence.
I gotta pin that.
Gilberti.
It is a first generation solar panel that has had the plastic burned off of it.
Oh, come on.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wrinkles all up. And the coolest thing is that over the 5 years we've had it, it's developed a patina. We made them, did not actually document this, but yeah, the colors change with time.
That is awesome. I would never have guessed that. You're right.
Me neither.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
that's a preview of what we'll do when we do visual art.
Sounds awesome. Let's be careful out there. See y'all on the inner tubes.
Ciao.